I've never been to Kashmir, but Kashmir has been at the forefront of a lot of my own life growing up in India. The second reason I chose to be on this panel was, even as an economist, I have increasingly learned that as economists we study human decision making, and I truly have seen through fieldwork, through life experience and scholarly work, that identity is one of the biggest drivers of human decision making. And in the context of Kashmir, I think it's a particularly critical driver of decision making. It is not just political, but cultural and ideological. Already on the last panel, I think all three panelists, emphasized the importance of including Kashmiris in the Kashmir dialogue. Kashmir for Kashmir's sake, leaders being careful about what they say because it feeds into the identity. And then, the incorporation of Kashmiriyat, as you said, Lisa, in the context of Prime Minister Vijay. So I think we're already talking about it, but for the next hour, we're going to talk about it specifically. We're very lucky to have an amazing panel. My role will be that of a moderator. But we have here Raza Rumi, who's an independent columnist and policy analyst, very much focused on issues of identity in the modern era, I would say, with lots of visions there. We have Sasha Riser-Kositsky, who is an associate in the Asia program of the Eurasia group. And we have Dr. Vijay Sazawal, who is a policy analyst and commentator on contemporary affairs of Kashmir. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand it to Sasha to go first, and we'll then hear from Raza Rumi and then Dr. Vijay Sazawal.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to keep my remarks very brief and focus just on the politics and the BJP-PDP coalition that came to power just a few months ago. In forming the alliance, Mufti Saeed likened it to the coming together of the North and the South Pole. This is an alliance that was formed at the last minutes after 2 months of tense negotiations. Now, their common minimum program is quite eloquently written. Its developmental goals are laudable. But I think in the end, you'll see political differences invariably getting in the way. It's very hard to see this coalition lasting for more than perhaps a few years. Saeed's description of this coalition as the coming together of two things that are polar opposites is very apt. The PDP and the BJP have little in common. Their bases are centered in Kashmir and Jammu, respectively. The common minimum program states it's not that the mandate of the political parties is fractured, it's that the polities of J&K that is fractured. And this divided, of course, it's important to remember this divided polity has similar demands. Indians of all ages across the country are universally demanding good governance, infrastructure development, jobs, healthcare, education. And the common minimum program is very much focused on trying to make grand promises to improve all 5 of these measures. And it's very easy for everyone to agree that roads should be built on time and on budget, and that victims of natural disasters should get compensation and get aid. But there's even debate, on the developmental side as well. You see now disputes over where the new aims and IIM should be located in J&K, whether or not in Jammu or Kashmir. But if voters, just base their decisions on the developmental promises of political parties alone, then there'd be very little reason to pick one party over another. It's very important to remember that both the BJP and the Congress manifestos in the run-up to this last parliamentary election last year were strikingly similar if you compare them text to text. The real differences, of course, were in the leadership and the ideologies that backed those texts. And the BJP and the PDP are no different. They have strikingly different visions for the future of Kashmir. They have strikingly different beliefs on the best path towards the peace and prosperity that all voters aspire to achieve. The demands of their political basis are also very strong. The PDP professes to believe in self-rule. The BJP's core ideological facet is a belief in national unity. These are mutually incompatible political visions. So can these opposed political parties cooperate? For how long? Once they make the trains run on time, what next? Can they make the trains run on time? I argue that the implementation risks are extremely high on that front, but I would wonder how long they could cooperate at all. And here I identify the biggest stumbling block is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The tensions are already building along these lines, and this is going to get worse every time members of the military are involved in incidents that generate civilian casualties or alleged to have generated civilian casualties. And these incidents are inevitable, and they're going to continue to happen. In fact, just, I believe, yesterday, a young man was killed in Pullman. The military says he was a militant. Protesters say he was civilian. Unclear what actually happened. His family is alleging that there were no bullet holes in the body. The army apparently just beat him to death. Hopefully, a subsequent investigation will determine the true facts. But these kinds of incidents will continue. And these kinds of incidents are going to drive the PDP base to come down much, much harder on the BJP and demand the rollback of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The compromise that you saw in the Common Minimum Program, where they would agree to roll back the act gradually in districts considered free from violence, it's very hard to see how that practically works. What happens the next time a soldier in one of those areas where the act has been rolled back does something that generates, where you end up with a civilian corpse? Is the Army going to let the civilian police and prosecutors go after the soldier? I strongly doubt it. You're going to have a very nasty debate over that. Rolling back OSPA district by district is not going to work very well. And this becomes even more salient at the point where violence is on a small uptick at the current time. The numbers of deaths in J&K was down for the last several years. It's now ticking back very slightly, if for no other reason than militant groups are arguably, some of them at least, refocusing their malignant gaze from some of the international forces in Afghanistan back towards India. And it will hobble some of these plans to roll back OSPA. The other sticking points and disputes between the TDP and the BJP, it's hard to see those really coming to a fore and being responsible for the breakup of the coalition. These debates over releasing some militants from prison, already fairly smoothed over. Other rhetoric from the BJP's more right-wing elements from across the country, again, probably not going to be of huge concern. No one really takes the Shiv Sena's rants about denying voting rights to Muslims very seriously. As Modi pointed out today, actually, in Berlin, Indian secularism cannot be shaken because of language. It's a little bit stronger than that. And Article 370 as well, again, one of these things that people talk about, but it's hard to see it as a major sticking point in the here and now in the next couple of years. Serious action on repealing or otherwise abrogating Article 370 of the Constitution, very difficult. The BJP has better things to do at the national level. Modi has much better ways to spend his political capital. He's focused on issues designed to bolster economic growth and create jobs for his voters, not on some ideological rant in J&K. It's simply not worth it for him to push on Article 370. But it's the Armed Forces Special Powers Act that I think will eventually cause the breakup of this coalition sometime in the next couple of years. And that's really how I see the politics developing in J&K over the next couple of years. I'll end it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Shareen. I'm just going to pick a few points on the whole idea of how Pakistani and Indian nationalism has been constructed after independence in 1947 around the issue of Kashmir, who owns Kashmir, who has a right to Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, the whole state. And sadly, that whole evolution of a debate and construction of identities of both the nations has meant that there has been a marginalization, bordering on almost exclusion of what the Kashmiris have always wanted, or what is their identity, or the term Kashmiri that you referred to earlier. And I think, from the Pakistani perspective, Pakistan has obviously used the Kashmir issue and the whole imagination of occupied Kashmir as the central plank of its nationhood. So the construction of Pakistani identity and the way Pakistan ought to be and the policy choices it makes have centered on the idea of regaining Kashmir either through military force or through other means, and that has extracted a heavy price from Pakistan, not just in terms of the military spending, but all the 4 wars minor and major waged with India, and the way they have led to various upheavals within Pakistan, including the breakup of the country in 1971, and later on the most recent conflict of Kargil in 1999, which unfortunately came to harm the Kashmir quote-unquote cause, as we say in Pakistan, more than support it or enhance it. At the same time, the Indian nationalism and the Indian nationhood has also treated Kashmir as a jewel in the crown, and how important it is and how central it is to both the geographical as well as the nationalistic identity of India. And that has also led to the kind of permanent hostility between the two countries. And as we speak, I mean, while it is true that in India a lot of people and a lot of analysts and thinkers say that Pakistan is no longer the threat to India and it's China or whatever, but the reality is that nearly 60 to 70% of Indian armed forces are deployed along the Pakistani borders, and that does create a whole dynamic and momentum of its own. So regardless of what the official strategic forecasting would be, but the reality is that Pakistan is also considered to be that particular, the enemy, the way Pakistan considers India to be like that. But Pakistan's issue is far deeper, because the way Pakistani or Pakistaniyat is defined is anything and everything but Indian. So that makes it even more problematic, because then you have to kind of delink Pakistan from its thousands of years of history in the region, from its geographical and cultural heritage with India and other parts of South Asia. And this dynamic has played out both in terms of the arms build-up, in terms of the public narratives, the discourses that are popular in media, etc. So, for example, if you see Bollywood movies until the recent Heather film came out, all earlier Bollywood films somehow projected that Indian identity and Kashmir being central to that, and there was always this lurking foreign Parosi neighboring enemy out to come and destroy that identity. And if you look at Pakistani popular narratives, the film, the textbooks, you also see the same idea of this larger neighbor occupying the Kashmiri population and the Kashmiri territory, and somehow that has to be liberated as an article of faith in Pakistani nationhood. So regardless of saying whether they're right or wrong, I mean, I'm just presenting them to you while building the argument that both these narratives and both these ideas of Kashmir are excluded what the Kashmiris have wanted, or what the people there have kind of aspired for. Whether it is self-determination. I mean, in the earlier panel, we showed various 5 or 6 ideas that have captured the political discourse and also the negotiations from full independence to autonomy to elections to self-governance to other various means. But the problem has been that only in recent years has this particular factor been acknowledged, that the Kashmiris are central to whatever happens to the future of Jammu and Kashmir, whether it is a part of India and it is going to be governed under the Indian constitutional framework, or whether it is going to have a different autonomous status. The Kashmiris ought to be central to that conversation and dialogue. And I think more and more that is coming out in the new sort of forms of communication that we see, particularly in the new media, for example, where you see a lot of young Kashmiris articulating their political views, and despite the fact that there has been earlier, I mean censorship also exists on both sides, sadly, but new media has sort of challenged that and kind of undone some of those barriers, and you do see a lot of clamoring for either an autonomous solution or some of the hardliners even argue for independence. And the polls also show that kind of split. You know, all the opinion polls that have been taken in both Pakistani side and the Indian side, nearly 40 to 50% of those interviewed have asked for an independent solution to Kashmir. Now, which way that goes, I think that has to do with a lot of, as was mentioned in the earlier panel, between how Indian and Pakistani states act to move forward and find a way whereby this long-standing dispute is either addressed or settled in some way. I think the most encouraging moment was under General Musharraf and Manmohan Singh when India and Pakistan moved towards a 4-point formula, and both sides have now, I mean, there's enough evidence to say that it was not just a kind of floating proposal, but there was a lot of paperwork done on it. And Mr. Manmohan Singh's aide wrote a book recently in which he corroborates that the former Indian Prime Minister had himself looked at those papers and made some changes with his pen. And Musharraf's Foreign Minister, Khurshid Kasuri, has also confirmed that there was a back-channel diplomatic effort going on, and both the sides were close to that particular deal. How does it pan out? I think the most adverse influence it has had the India-Pakistan tension and the competing nation-state imagination has had on the concept of Kashmir itself. Because on the one hand, you have thousands of Kashmiri pundits who have been dislocated, made homeless within their, and many fear going back to the place. I mean, there has been some recent movement of restarting that process, but the idea is that they have been marginalized and excluded, and then you have a lot of Kashmiris who have also been are being radicalized, and much like the South Asian Islam, the Kashmiri Muslim identity was also a very hybrid and plural identity. The existence of large shrine networks and the Sufi saints and other dargahs was a very inclusive and a pluralistic, a secular vision of Muslim identity. That's hardly since late 1980s, both after the Kashmiri uprising and the Pakistan-based militant groups entering into the fray for nearly a decade, have shifted that whole identity, and there is more and more radicalization that we see among the Kashmiri voices. I mean, there are Kashmiri politicians wearing a whole, a burqa with not just a burqa, but with these black gloves, which are not even worn in Saudi Arabia. And I saw this lady politician on TV, and I was wondering where it came from. I think it was a decade ago. And then all the networks that have been penetrating in the Kashmiri society, and these are the networks that argue and promote the Salafi Wahhabi version of Islamic identity, is then linked to both what is happening in Pakistan and to some degree within the Indian Muslims as well. And I think that has been a real tragic outcome of this long-standing dispute, and particularly after the 1989 onwards, where this Kashmiri idea has been now, been sort of pulled in two different directions of extreme views of the Hindu and Muslim religion. And finally, I would also like to make a point that I think in general, violent extremism and exclusion have been studied in various contexts. And other than the fact that, as Riser-Kositsky in the earlier panel mentioned about the terrorist networks that operate, from Pakistan and some alleged within Kashmir as well. The idea that there's a draconian Army Special Forces Act, which was also referred to by Sasha, as a contesting point, and that may lead to some political upheavals. And the idea that you know, increasingly it is a securitized state where a large number of security personnel do not really encourage a kind of an organic or a democratic pluralistic solution. So the numbers vary, you know, from 300,000 to 700,000, depending which way you look at. But you know, there's a consensus that nearly 500,000 police, paramilitary, armed forces troops are stationed in Jammu and Kashmir. And you know, the Indian government does not really disclose the exact number, but the presence of this and the reaction of that must also be taken into account while looking at how the local population operates in this sort of arena where hardline terrorist or Islamic militant groups operate from the Pakistani side and get some local support, but also the kind of exclusion that the young Kashmiris face and the kind of police barricades. And there are many stories and books now being authored about that. So I think it kind of complicates the whole scenario, because then it definitely shifts the solution or the move towards a more reasoned and a more kind of a democratic outcome of the conflict and the contested identities in the region. I'll stop. Thank you.
I want to thank the Georgetown University, Irfan, for inviting me here. I want to recognize some good friends. Christine Fair was not here yet. We have Lisa Kurtz, who's here, Lisa, Steve Cohen, Jay Kansara from Indo-American Foundation, some good friends. So I am not going to be talking about a solution. I think people have given other ideas before. I would though make a comment on, since there have been made two references to the Musharraf plan. Musharraf plan, and I have had extensive discussions with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on that issue, one-on-one. Musharraf plan is not unlike the US-Iran nuclear agreement. The two scripts were not the same, and the Indian Parliament, which made a parliamentary debate on the issue and issued a sense of resolution of the Parliament in 1994, is not unlike the issues that are we confronting in the United States today about how we feel about an agreement with a country that you can't trust. So let's get real here. There is no plan right now. So I think issue is still to be resolved. I do agree with it. But let's start understanding first the dimensions of the problem. All right, the state has 87,000 square miles, give or take a few miles here and there. Roughly 45% of that is in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, which consists of three major regions, Kashmir, Jammu and Ladakh. And then we have Azad Kashmir and northern areas which constitute Pakistani administrated or Pakistani occupied Kashmir. They're about 35%. And the rest, 15%, is about Aksai Chan, plus another 2,000 square miles or thereabouts that was given by Pakistan in 1963 over to China. So you have essentially, that's the division. Now, we're talking about this global focus is on Kashmir Valley. What's the size of the Kashmir Valley? 6,000 square miles, give or take a few hundred miles here and there. On the overall size of the state of, whole state of, it's 7%. Even on the Indian, recognizing the Indian state, is 15%. Now, normally you would think, well, that's a storm in a teacup. But we, of course, know it's not a storm in a teacup. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The first one, of course, is that it is a product of the Indo-Pakistan separation, creation of two states, United Nations resolutions, and the fact of the matter is that there is a certain Kashmir identity, which is different than in other areas. Other areas tend to be a lot more mixture of different kinds of people, different kinds of ethnicities, Rajputs, both Hindus and Muslims, Kishtwaris, Bardwaris, Gujars, Dogra. These are all different varieties. In Kashmir, you primarily had essentially one kind of people for a long, long, long time. And those were Kashmiri Pandits. 100%. Even when Delhi was being ruled by the Sultanate, Kashmir was Hindu, 100% Hindu. Now, of course, part of the reason was it was surrounded by mountains. You had visitors coming in. We have a lot of visitors from, especially from Iran, Turkey, and others visiting, even after the Islam came to the doors of India, with Ghazni and all that. But by and large, it was an area in itself. Then what happens? And as I said, you go back to cultural roots; they are primarily part of the Indian dominion. Whether it was Mauryas in 3rd century BC, the Kushans in 1st century, Vikramaditya of Ujjain. Even from Ujjain, he went all the way up there and created the kingdom. So you had essentially a period when you had basically Buddhism and Hinduism flourishing in Kashmir. That happened for a long time. Islam came in a very interesting way into Kashmir. Essentially, you had one of the things, don't want to digress too much, but one of the things under Mughal Empire was there used to be always a competition on who would win to be the successor Khan. And the first thing he would do is he would kill all his worthy competitors. So that immediately after somebody would be declared a Khan, the rest would just flee because they knew they would be either dead or something. And it happens that one of them sits up in the Caucasus and he's told about this Kashmir thing, and his name is Zulqadar Khan. And he basically takes a mission up there in Kashmir, essentially pretty much destroys the place, destroys the local temples and all that. And unfortunately, actually, his name was Zulqadar Khan, and unfortunately, actually dies on his way back through the snow passes, along with the 60,000 females and able-bodied males, young males that he had taken as slaves. But what that did, essentially at that time, was it actually rattled the kingdom, the Hindu kingdom of Kashmir. For the first time, they realized the security wasn't there. And of course, once that thing happened, it became then the palace intrigue started coming in, and people started noticing who is in town, who is not in town, what is he doing here. And in that process, we had the first a Turkish man who shows up in the court and eventually ends up becoming actually the owner, the ruler of his name is Shamir. So he becomes the ruler in 1339. So we're talking about much after Islam has pretty much come everywhere else. Then what happens and it starts as a Sufi religion. It starts with a lot of discussion. Primarily, the people are either Turkish origin from Caucasus, or they are from Persia. They're from Iran. And then we come to a 7th emperor who was Sikandar Baltistan, and I would say, if you would ask me who is the closest role model to that guy, it's ISIL. I mean, he pretty much destroyed whatever Hindu culture, Hindu religion, Hindu population was there. In fact, to the point where the 11 families basically survived because they fled into the hills. And so all the Kashmiri Pandits today are essentially these survivors of those 11 families that ended up there. So that was the fate of, and of course, whosoever was left essentially ended up being living there as you would live under a strict Islamic state. So which means you had to pay jizya, you had to you had to do all kinds of things, and you would never get above a certain rank in the state service and so on and so forth. Now we talk about Kashmirian. Now, the way Kashmir evolved was actually through two very magnanimous kings. The first one was actually the fellow who followed Sikandar Baltistan in 1423, which is 10 years later after he died, and that was Zainul Abidin, or Badshah. He's called Badshah very popularly in Kashmir. He basically invited these clans to come back. He guaranteed them jobs, he guaranteed them protection, he guaranteed them, actually all of them were given court positions, so that, so the public at large would know if you harm those guys, you're going to pay for it, because they are all appointed to court positions. A very visionary man. Was there for a good bit of time, and of course after he passed away, things stayed for some time well for these basically families, these 10, 11 families, large families, 10 million clans, and then it started getting deterioration again set in, and we can trace our own ancestry to the period when the Afghans came over and ruled Kashmir. It was Chaks. And it was merciless. I mean, we have texts in our family where the guy said basically you were walking down the street and any guy would tell, are you a Pandit? Yeah, well, lift me up on your shoulder and take me to the next street. And oppression was supreme. Again, divine intervention, Akbar, Mughal emperor, Akbar defeats Chaks. He wants to have the dominion of India grown up. He defeats Chaks and comes into Kashmir and takes, because he's already himself thinking about his own vision of Islam, and Islamic religion was very Sufi type, very secularistic. So he talks to these people and he sees their misery, and he again gives new lectures and puts a script there that essentially these guys have to be protected. And even though over the period of years, basically, quite frankly, up to the next 5, 6 generations of Mughals, they basically maintained that culture. So the Kashmiri was created, this mixture which evolved into taking Buddhists and other people into the idea was it's contained around Sufi culture. It takes the best of all the religions. It makes accommodation for people. And most importantly, there are visionary leaders who are ensuring that it gets implemented. That's how Kashmiriyat came along. And that's how Kashmiriyat came up. So it didn't happen by itself. There were visionary leaders from the Muslim rulership that actually ensured that. Now it's interesting. We do have, I think Raza already mentioned, we do have rise of Islam, Wahhabism started. It started unfortunately, in a very indirect manner. It started because of the Iran-Iraq war, 1980 through 1990. We have a leader who came in, which was essentially our keynote speaker's grandfather, who got the position back in 1975. He wanted to make Kashmir a kind of an international destination. He wanted to give that international look to Kashmir. So they built up this international convention center, a very magnificent building, if anybody has gone to Kashmir, around the Dal Lake. But there are no takers. Nobody's coming and nobody sees Kashmir as an international decision. And lo and behold, the war has started, and Iraq, Saddam is a very good friend of India. He pushes to have seminars in India about the Iraqi point of view in the Iraq-Iran war. So the Delhi government says, okay, why don't you go and have it in Kashmir? They have built a new international center up there. So he has a big Kashmir, the Muslim perspective of their war in Kashmir, from Iraqi point of view. Well, as soon as Iraqis were done, Iranians complained to the government in Delhi, and they said, well, what do you want to do? Well, we also want to do a seminar. So they did a seminar a few months later. But once you got the Iraqis and Iranians there, Saudis couldn't be far behind. And then Saudis said, we want to have seminar too, and we have a perspective on too. The Indian government said, please be guests. So Saudis showed up there. Now, only difference is when Saudis showed up, the Saudi money came along. And when the Saudi money came along, they imposed conditions on that money. How it has, because they said, we don't believe in this Sufi crap. This is all, anti-Islamic. We want you to build new mosques. We want you to create new preachers, and we want you to eventually ensure that Islamic people get enlightened that they should be going away from this Sufism and Sufi culture. And that started in earnest, essentially, around that period. And of course, in '86, we had in the contemporary period, post I would say post 1947 Indian independence, the first massive criminal raids in Kashmir, where basically minorities, Pandits, lost their substantial amount of property, houses were burned, temples were destroyed. But what was interesting was there's not a single mention of that in the Kashmiri papers, which was expected. They were all sort of already supporting Bahadism. But even in the Indian press, there was not much of a mention. In fact, if you go to my website, kashmirforum.org, you'll see a correspondence between myself and the New York Times correspondent in Delhi, because his editors, I pushed his editors to go and investigate what is going on in Kashmir, because nobody is reporting about it. And by the way, to some extent, we believe those rights were actually initiated by the man who is today the chief minister of the state. That's the irony of the state politics. But that gave a clue to these people that if you can kick out this community from here, that will make Wahhabism easier. And nobody in India is going to lose their sleep on it. And when it happened in '89 and '90, by God, that's what happened. Nobody in India really shed a tear. A community of 350,000 is completely taken off from the valley. It's completely displaced. And I'm using words here at the Congress that we're victims of Islamic terrorism, and the Indian ambassador calls me and says, Dr. Sazawal, there is no such thing, and don't you use those terms. That's very offensive to the Islamic language. I said, well, I'm not being offensive to all my best friends are Kashmiri Muslims. Even they are denouncing what has happened here. But the problem is the Indian polity is so weird that we are not able to even get our own standing in India, what has happened to our community. And that essentially set the stage. So what happened then? When I say here, death of Kashmir, March 1997, what happened? The Mujahideen go into a village, which is predominantly Pandit village. Now remember, this is 97. This is after the peak of the militancy is over. They wipe out all the Kashmiri Pandits who are still living in that hamlet. June 1997, what happens? Bus is going through the state. They stop the bus. They pick up Hindus on one side, Muslims on the other side, and all the Pandits are shot down dead. January 1999 is called Vandama Massacre. Again, people go in, pluck out Pandits out of essentially what is a joint, peaceful community of Muslims and Pandits, and kill only Pandits.
So, Dr. Sazawal, sorry, can I interrupt? I just got a note saying we're going to have a very special visitor in about less than 10 minutes.
All right.
May I, if you don't mind, there are some amazing points in the bottom of your comments. Do you mind sharing those with our audience and then using questions perhaps to get through the rest so that we can make room for our visitor?
If you ask me to finish in 10 minutes, I'll finish in 10 minutes.
So we have to finish the entire panel, including questions, by then.
So give me 5 minutes. Does that sound reasonable?
I'm going to let her tell us.
Question answers, maybe?
Yeah. Do you mind
That's right.
concluding and taking a couple of questions?
I mean, my conclusion. Well, again, I think quite honestly, I will go with some of the line that Raza used, which is, minorities are not an issue only on the Indian side, though its Indian side is really unique because, quite frankly, Indian state has failed the minorities in Jammu and Kashmir. That's a fact, and let's not coincide with words around here. On the other hand, their fate at the end is not very dissimilar from the minorities' fate in the Pakistani side of Kashmir. And in my opinion, quite honestly, if people keep continuing in a state of denial and not recognizing that at the end, the solution has to be such which is inclusive to the future and welfare of minorities, you're not going to get a stable solution. So I think the politics is all local. It begins close to home. You've got to settle and decide on how you're going to bring minorities and respect for minorities back. Because Kashmiri identity, quite frankly, that was the essence of Kashmiri. It was the return and pluralism of the society. Not only doesn't it exist today, Kashmiri Muslims, by and large, deny that there is even a problem like that. 25 years is a lot of time in which people could be brought back, have not been. There are excuses, there's rhetoric, polemics, all kinds of things. So I'm arguing that whatever solution at the end has to take place, it will be inherently unstable, in my view, unless we don't also consider the importance of ensuring that minorities are protected in their respective parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, while we had the microphone, I just wanted to pick up on something at the very bottom of this document, which is about the space for civil society. A common denominator between what all our speakers were talking about is in a conflict zone like Kashmir, with the heavy level of militarization, with the history of now an entire generation that's grown up in conflict. I think the challenge of rekindling civil society and opening up spaces for dialogues between people and even exploring what Kashmiriyat is with this plurality of identities is a big challenge for us, I would say. And certainly the sustainability of any solution is going to depend on being able to tap it. So I'm going to let the microphone, that's a comment more than a question, but the microphone, please do introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jay Kansar. I'm with the Hindu American Foundation, and we, as an advocacy organization, have been very active on the issue of Kashmiri Pandits for about 10 years now. And one question we've always wanted to know an answer to is, why has the issue of the Kashmiri Pandit community evaded the discussion at the international level? Not for the lack of trying by the Kashmiri Pandit community, but why has the United States and even India and Pakistan failed to address this? And why do they continue to be ignored until now? And now there's a visceral reaction from the Kashmiri majority population for these composite townships, which really a good percentage of the Kashmiri population, Pandit population, that's how they want to return in order to ensure their safety.
Yeah, so are there more questions? We can take them. Yeah.
I can just say
And
that.
then back there.
So I'm Sona. I'm a student in the undergraduate program here in the SFS. Because I'm unaware of the specific policies of the two parties that you mentioned have a coalition now in Jammu and Kashmir, I was wondering if you guys could shed light on how new policy initiatives or kind of the goals of this coalition are going to be affecting minorities. So we've kind of discovered like how historically the government has dealt with this issue, but moving forward, what discourse has already existed around this?
Let's start. There's one more. Let's take 3 questions and then we can deliberate on the answers.
Hi, Vivek Gupta. My question is that recently Narendra Modi government has decided to bring back Kashmiri Pandit back in the valley. So are we bringing the Kashmiri Pandit back in the ghetto area where they have no rights, no basically safety, or are we trying to first make that area their home and then bringing them in? You know, if that is not their home and they are being brought in a ghetto area, I think it's more like we are being allowing to get them butchered again. So I'm afraid that this has been a well thought plan. Or what are your plans, if you can?
Let me address these. First of all, I think, as you heard, that we know from Sasha, you know, this government has just set up. I mean, he picked up on the Armed Forces Act, which is kind of has a sort of an international sex appeal, quite honestly. But I don't think on the local politics it really has been as big a factor. I mean, you have to understand, you're talking about a state which is, Transparency International calls the most corrupt state in India. There is a massive amount of money that flows into the state. Next year's budget is going to be 47,000 crores. I'm telling you, near a state with the same demographics and the you know, per capita would be around half of that. So they get a lot of money. And the whole idea is it goes into oligarchies, it goes into the essentially feudal families. They run the show. You know, at the ground level, Kashmir is not really very different from Pakistan, quite honestly. That's, you know, that's a cultural thing. I don't know whether it's a cultural thing. It's a whatever thing it is. The fact is, there is not that much accent, as Pakistani Prime Minister the other day said. I don't have time for development. So I think there's an issue like that. Now, it's very interesting. The government in Delhi does want Kashmiri Pandits after 25 years of essentially lip service from previous chief ministers, including the one that you'll hear later, to bring them back. But the fact is, everybody is up in the arms there because they don't want them to come back. So they're giving all kinds of excuses. Kashmiri Pandits have to decide what they want to do. Nobody else can suggest to them how they want to come back. I mean, as much as my friend there talks about ghettoism and all that, but the fact is, the Kashmiri Pandits, they are the ones who are going to die if they want to die. But if we gotta listen to what those people are saying. We gotta do what they want. Their own sense of security is what decides how they want to come back. But right now, that plan is pretty much dead because everybody in Kashmir, every civil society, every politician, whether pro-India or against India, has basically drawn a red line and said we reject that plan. So I don't think the plan is going anywhere, and I don't think Kashmiri Pandits are going to come back, soon anyway.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at the common minimum program. There was a lot of debate over how to address the issue. So they finally said, yes, we want to bring back the Kashmiri Pandits, but they didn't say how. And that's the debate you're having right now, is the nitty-gritty to how and why. And I don't think it's not going to get solved anytime soon. At the end of the day, it's up to the individuals themselves. If they want to come back today, there's nothing really preventing them. It's a matter of how the government may or may not facilitate that with houses, land, money, what have you. Hard to see anything substantial happening anytime soon. Never say never, but I don't. At this point, I wonder how many folks actually do want to come back, considering they've been living in other places for 20-odd years and are somewhat established. How many people would want to come back, I don't know. But it's a political fight that's not going to get solved anytime soon.
Well, why has it evaded the international conversation on Kashmir for over 2 decades?
I mean, I think it has evaded, definitely, and but that is a question you should better address to, Mr. Abdullah and the Indian side. Because I think it is the states that set the agenda. So both India and Pakistan have been talking at the level of foreign secretaries, foreign ministers, top leaderships, and this has been missing. But I think that is the whole issue of marginality and exclusion, that you exclude certain communities and certain groups from these high-level nationalistic sort of engagements, and that is a real tragedy, whether it's Hindu Pandits or other minorities in South Asia.
So, you just said it's a question best addressed to Mr. Abdullah. So on that note, we are very fortunate to have a guest appearance from our keynote speaker. He is the 11th and youngest Chief Minister of Kashmir. He came into power in January 2009. He was a member of the 14th Lok Sabha. He was representing the Srinagar constituency. But Mr. Abdullah has done an enormous number of other things. He has served as the Minister of State and External Affairs in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, who we were talking about earlier. He has had a long and distinguished career serving Kashmir. And without further ado, I actually want to turn it over to him. So, just say a quick
I'll save mine for the honesty. I just came to listen in to what everybody else was saying.
Do you want to keep listening
Yes,
into our discussion?
I would rather.
So we're talking about the Kashmiri identity, and in anticipation of your arrival, we were, taking question and answers. But I would actually love to turn it back to Dr. Sazawal, who was wrapping up. Would you like to conclude, sir?
Well, I think I concluded. As I said again, let me make a point since my beloved friend is here. I don't think at the end of the day you will have a stable solution on both sides of the ceasefire line until you have not accounted for a pluralistic society on both sides. And the fact is, there is a tremendous trust deficit among the minorities in Kashmir about the abilities of the majority community to accommodate them back in the valley. And this point can be debated, of course, because the majority community, I think by and large, is in a state of denial, doesn't recognize that 25 years is a long time, and we got to give something else a chance. I think that is key. But again, in a broader context, I think the fact that Pakistan has divided Azad Kashmir from the Gilgit-Baltistan area and those minorities in Gilgit and Baltistan are, quite frankly, not treated on par, both politically and socially, with the Azad Kashmir people. That's also a source of concern. I think stability of the minorities on both sides is an issue, common issue that has not been dealt, quite frankly, by powers that be. And part of the reason is because powers that be always represent the majority community interest. But that's not how a solution, which is a stable solution, at the end will emerge. So my sense is, this question will keep waxing until we have a holistic solution involving all the constituents and peoples of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
So I think we're going to break for coffee and then reconvene with a conversation with Dr. Cohen right afterwards. So I'm going to give us all a chance to interact with Mr. Abdullah as well. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.